Now that I've talked about both a Stanislavskian and a Brechtian read on Topdog Underdog, I want to talk about status, or rather the concept of theatrical status, which is separate from where your actual social position in the world, from the works of Keith Johnstone, famous drama teacher. Keith Johnstone, the classic works improvisation theater. Johnstone is not as famous as Stanislavski or Brecht, who are household names, but he is nonetheless enormously influential on contemporary acting practice, both in terms of improv, how actors are taught improv, and in fact, at this point, all actors are trained in some improv techniques. Very quickly, very quickly, Johnstone claims that almost any utterance we make to another person raises or lowers our own status relative to that person. He's making an anthropological claim about how people interact all the time. People are building themselves up at your expense, they're lowering you, or they're kind of building you up at their own expense, depending. There are two things here. There's high status and low status, and Johnstone claims no speech act is neutral, that everything does. Like, we're constantly doing it, we can't help it, we do it unconsciously, but if you start thinking about it, it's a powerful theatrical tool. He also claims that some people are, both some actual people and some performers and some characters are either rigid or flexible in their status play. Some people, some characters are high status all the time, and can't play anything else and fail when attempt to do. They can't lower their status, it throws them off. Or they're low status all the time, they cringe more. A classic of comedy, the too high status character who is rigid and has a higher status than they can really afford is a kind of standard ironized. It is what irony builds on. Stephen Colbert used to call his old character he used, the persona he used in his previous television show that won on Comedy Central. It was a kind of fake character he was doing as he was playing while he hosted. He called that person a low information, high status idiot. Not because that person's great. High status doesn't mean you're the president or whatever. Lincoln and Booth are both low class. They're nearly penniless criminals living in a boarding house with water. You can't say socially either of them are upper class. Johnstone's status has nothing to do with that. But they play different statuses to each other. Some characters are extremely flexible, can manipulate their own status at will, effectively, tactically build the other person up to make him happy again. Cut him down a little subtly, I'll build him back up, or whatever it takes. Put yourself down a little bit, the classic self-deprecating joke, a classic of social performance, right? You lower your own status strategically, not because you're actually trying to put yourself at anybody's mercy, but it's actually a way of tactically succeeding in this social situation. Some people are rigid, some people are not. It is a way of reading. Now, what does this have to do with a play called Topdog Underdog? I would say the concept of social status or theatrical status has everything to do with a play called Topdog Underdog, where in various ways there's a clear Johnstonian reading where these characters are trying to fight for some kind of supremacy. It's more interesting to watch Lincoln, who's not simply the top dog. Watch how often Lincoln plays low status, that he plays meekness, that he builds Booth up. Booth sometimes builds Lincoln up too, praises him, etc. So praising somebody else raises their status and implicitly lowers yours. Insulting somebody grossly, the opposite. Because bragging is a way to raise your status. If we could imagine a person who bragged constantly and could never admit any failing, that would be a rigid, high status player. The ancient Greek comedy calls that the alazon, the person, the ironist, deflates. The Iron is always like, oh yeah, you're so smart, and then sting. Watch, watch how Lincoln builds up Booth and tends to put himself down or is meek or defers, etc. Think of this as not as something about how he actually feels, not about how he feels, but as something he does. It's also part of a con man skill. Oh, look at the con man rap. Look at their 3-card Monte rap. It's like a lot of it is about building up the mark so you can take his money. You must be the man of the hour, the man of the power. Oh, you have, put your money down. You ain't no clown. Says, you're no clown. Or are you? Very complicated status play. Or are we upset now? Oh. Okay. Duty calls. But these are 3 different ways of thinking, of analyzing a play, all of which we can use to think about Top Dog Underdog.